we are part of a much more interconnected, vibrant reality. And we have to take our right place in that. We have to have a right relationship with each other, with the natural world, and with these evolving, intelligent beings in order to create a future that is really worthy of all of us, not just one of us.
Welcome to the Humanity Code Conversations. I'm Heidi Lawrenson, and today we'll explore another perspective on intentionally shaping the future with AI, where our technology amplifies our shared humanity rather than diminishes it. Talk about kindred spirit. Today's guest is someone who not only shares our vision for what's needed for a positive future with AI, but she's dedicated her life to making it a reality. Caroline Chubb Calderon is a visionary futurist, passionate humanist, and a catalyst for civilization redesign in the age of AI. With a unique blend of corporate experience, spiritual wisdom, and technological foresight, Caroline is at the forefront of humanity's most crucial evolution, understanding that the inner work is as important as the outer work. As the founder and CEO of Hello Humanity, Caroline is shifting the mindsets of tech giants. She trains executives at companies like Google, Microsoft, and IBM to become conscious custodians of our world, preparing humans for the radical reskilling necessary to thrive alongside artificial intelligence. Caroline's global perspective is as diverse as her skill set. A true citizen of the world, she speaks 5 languages and has called numerous countries home, another bonding point for us. This cultural fluency makes her an invaluable bridge in our increasingly interconnected world. Her expertise spans psychology, strategy, marketing, and organizational behavior, complemented by training in Buddhism, not to mention the teachings of Brené Brown. This holistic approach allows her to see the big picture while offering practical solutions. Caroline's work extends to shaping the very foundations of AI ethics, too. She collaborates with the IEEE and works alongside international cohorts to define AI standards that will positively guide the development of this transformative technology. I appreciate her unwavering optimism that's coupled with a sense of urgency. Like us, she believes that if we navigate the next few years wisely, we can create the most advanced and humane civilization imaginable, and that failing to take this moment seriously could lead us down a far less desirable path. Caroline, thank you so much for being with us today. There's so much ground to cover, but I'd like to begin with the end in mind. First question is, one of the things that deeply concerns me is there's a lack of vision for what a good future with AI could look like. If we're thinking with the same linear, short-sighted mindsets that got us here, how can we possibly fathom what a good future with AI looks like? You've aptly said there's a lack of Horizon 3 visioning. Can you elaborate on what that means and why it's so problematic?
Well, first of all, I just want to say a huge thank you to you for inviting me here and for holding these conversations and for doing the work that you're doing with the Humanity Code. We need more people to really stir up the conversations so that we can make these kinds of futures possible. And I appreciate the question. I think I spoke with you offline quite a few times. If we look around us and just sense into this moment, I feel a lot of compassion for where we are as a human species. There's an enormous amount of intersectional crises that are evolving. We don't need to name them again. They've been aptly named a polycrisis. And we are also surrounded by a number of dystopian visions of what a potential future might look like for us. We are constantly exposed to images, stories, ideas that just are honestly detrimental to our collective imaginings. So if I asked you, what vision of the future do you have that is vibrant, positive, optimistic, relational, enthusiastic in a world that is, in a world that we walk alongside with cyborgs and AI and superintelligence? Can you create one for me? Can you even name one that you've seen? And when I ask this question, no matter what group or forum I'm in, the answer is generally a big sigh, a big knowing of, no, we don't have that vibrant vision. And so we need to shift the conversation, because more and more, and I don't, frankly, I don't know between you and me if life follows art or art follows life, but there certainly seems to be some sort of relational dynamic there, right? What we see is more and more becoming reality. If you think of the visions that we have of the future of like Her and Ex Machina and Terminator, here we are. We have conversational AIs, we have, agentic AIs, we have robots that very quickly are going to be able to mimic all of human movements. I mean, we thought, the robots will never come for example, those highly manipulative type of work and jobs, because it could never be quite as precise as human hands or human beings. Well, sure enough, all of those ideas have been now debunked. We have robots that can do surgery. We have robots that can do constructions. We have robots that can enter any field that was inherently thought of as just a human field. So my urgent question to all of us is, what is a vision that we can truly be excited about for a future, knowing that somehow we get magnetized to that vision, that somehow that vision becomes reality? And we need far more of them, and far more imaginatory ones, and far more vibrant, enthusiastic, optimistic, valuable ones. And when I talk about Horizon 3 visionings, here's what I'm talking about. I spent a lifetime working in disruptive innovation. I know in your introduction, you mentioned a whole lot of things, but really, if you were to sum it up as one thing, it's how do we disrupt? And we need to disrupt our vision for the future. What we have right now is a whole lot of innovation around Horizon 1 thinking. Horizon 1 thinking is simply an evolution of our current thinking. It is AI overlaid our economic models, AI overlaid our infrastructure models, AI overlaid our social models. It's still based.
It's what we know.
It's what we know. It's still based on neoclassical economic ideas of heightened productivity, heightened extraction, heightened value creation, and so on. And there's inherently nothing wrong with that, as long as it's not causing bigger damage on the end. And right now, based on all of my analysis and the analysis of my colleagues in the space, unfortunately, we can no longer deflect or defray those existential risk possibilities. We are in every way potentially causing an economic collapse, a civilizational collapse, a geopolitical collapse with unbridled AI development. So we need something that is unorthodox, that is, that doesn't exist within this sphere of thinking. That's something that we need an idea of the future that is what Daniel Schmachtenberger calls the third attractor, like something completely novel and new that drives us to a different possibility. And that is what I would call a Horizon 3 vision. So Horizon 3 visions are visions of a collective future in relation to not just how human civilization needs to survive in this new world, but actually needs to thrive with technological entities, along with more than human entities, nature, and our ecological well-being. So what does that Horizon 3 vision look like? And just to complete the picture, Horizon 2 is experiments, very vital experiments that need to happen in order to off-ramp from Horizon 1 ideas and on-ramp to Horizon 3 ideas. So Horizon 2 visions are starting to happen. They're not at all sufficient enough. But there are ideas like universal basic income and regenerative economics, like things that try to help us shift the system from Horizon 1 to Horizon 3. But I can tell you there's a dearth of Horizon 3 thinkers, a dearth. I mean, tell me if you've come across anyone. There really
Yeah, I
are.
mean, our brains aren't really wired to do
Not
that,
why
right?
we're kind
We're
of like
so
stuck
linear.
in this perceptual frame of thinking that just gets us incremental results, as opposed to a completely a leap into a potential future. And look, Horizon 3 visions feel impossible because they require such a shift in systems that they feel like they're never going to be feasible. but the lack of them doesn't make any shift possible. So in my view, we need to stretch, if you were to think of it as a rubber band, we need to stretch a rubber band as far out as possible. And if we don't get to that very far future, at least we'll get to a further stretched reality that takes us away from our current dilemmas. So that's the short and long answer to Horizon 3.
What do you think should be some of those elements in that Horizon 3? You touched upon it at a high level, but to help people to start imagining what that could look like, what is a future worthy of building? What are some of the considerations we should make? What are the expectations that we should have? Again, we're so held back by our, current level of thinking that we just don't permit ourselves, or we just literally can't go beyond that.
Maybe the place to start is to call out what keeps us perceptually narrow thinking. And then from there, we can sort of like call on all of those and really have a revolution around them and think about what that future looks like. So a few things keep us locked into this current mode of thinking. The first is, and I think as soon as I name it, you're going to say yes, of course, but we don't talk about it enough. The first is this anthropocentric idea of our world, right? Like that human is somehow above and the center of our current universe. We need to do sort of this radical reorientation. It's almost like moving us from those times where we thought the Earth was the center of the universe to realizing that the Earth is spinning around the sun and not spinning around a cosmological universe and just part of it. We are part of a much more interconnected, vibrant reality. And we have to take our right place in that. We have to have a right relationship with each other, with the natural world, and with these evolving intelligent beings in order to create a future that is really worthy of all of us, not just one of us, one species. So the first is, let's challenge the anthropocentric idea, and then actually let's reorder the order of life so that we are in right relationship with life itself. I'll talk more about that in a second. The second thing that kind of keeps us trapped is our incentives. We are, and again, as soon as I name it, you're going to say yes, of course, but we don't talk about it enough. So we all know that we live in an environment, an ecosystem that is encouraging us and locking us into pursuing a profit-first motive future. And as long as it's about profits, as long as the incentives are about power and profits, we are leading to an order of systems where they become highly extractive, where there's power over, not power with, where we're constantly diminishing nature to be a contributor to our future as opposed to a sort of like a producer of our future as opposed to a contributor and a co-creator of our future. And we diminish each other. That's where we have socioeconomic inequalities. That's where we have geopolitical unevenness between the global north and global south. It's a constant power play that is reinforced by our incentive systems. So we have to shift the incentive system. Somehow we have to shift our economic conversation. And some of the things that I talk about is right now we're only talking about one form of capital, and it's finance. But we need to, and that whole system locks us in. I can't say enough about it. It's called the Molochian trap. It exists not just in our financial system, but exists in our, even in the way that countries invest in arms. So let me talk about that a little bit more. The Molochian trap really is this dynamic. It's based on a very old deity where people believe that if they were to sacrifice their firstborn son to this deity, then they would have a good crop. And of course, the dynamic is that we sacrifice our future in service of our well-being today. And we're constantly doing that. And if you look at it just in a warfare situation, for example, every country is forced to create and invest in military operations because otherwise they might feel insecure and geopolitically inadequate. No one country can stop investing in military operations because any one country that does falls behind. And right. They can't unilaterally step outside of this Molochian dynamic because, again, they will fall behind. So the only way to get past that incentive structure is to get global coordination and that is binding and of which a governance can exist that ensures that there's no inequality in those military strengths. Same thing with AI. We have if you talk to some people in Silicon Valley, they really do believe that they're in this Oppenheimer,
It's a
Oppenheimer
race.
moment. It's a race to protect the free world. It's a race to protect democracy. It's a race to ensure that the ideas upon which our democratic institutions were based are survivable. Well, what we're missing is a bigger picture, which is in the same way that we want to protect our freedoms, other countries want to protect their freedoms. And until we call that dynamic out, we're going to be stuck into that dynamic. And again, the only answer is a disruptive answer. The only answer is global coordination, global binding on a solution that is equitable and far-reaching. So our incentive structures are in diametrical opposition to a solution that would be beneficial for us as a society long-term, both from a Milken dynamic, also because of our economic dynamics. So we're only pursuing one type of capital. Are you still with me? By the way,
I'm totally tracking you. Yes.
So one of, it's like these paradigms that keep us locked in. So I'm just addressing the paradigms. So the, incentive paradigms that keep us locked in is also, we're always only pursuing one form of capital, which is financial capital. If you put that on its head, what you see is an emerging possibility, like the slightest taint of a different kind of possible future scenario for civilization. And that is a reordering of what we value in terms of capital. And here, what I'd like to introduce is the idea of 8 forms of capital. Why are we only pursuing financial capital as our only capital? There are other forms of capital. There's material capital, like, cars and homes and trucks and buses and all the things that we build, which is very adjacent to our current means. But there's also natural capital, like really valuing the value of life and living elements, everything from nitrogen to, the power of a leaf. All of these things we ought to be valuing with the same effort and same importance as financial capital. There's cultural capital, like creating art and music and song and story. There is intellectual capital, evolving our understandings, our thinking, our discoveries, our nature. There is relational capital, which personally I find completely lopsided right now, like valuing relationship between people in communities and society, actually recognizing the importance of that as a form of important exchange. There is spiritual capital, which kind of got co-opted by religious fervor, but really this idea of turning inwards in order to do the inner work that will result in outer change. That kind of inner work, spiritual thinking, spiritual seeking, that evolves us to become more mature as human beings and wiser as contributors in this ecosystem, is necessary and not prized. And I probably missed a couple, but you get the idea that we need a far more
radical reframing of what we value.
Exactly. So, shift the paradigm. We need to shift those paradigms. And once we do that, then an emergent possibility comes, right? So if we shift from anthropocentric to interconnection, if we shift from Molochian dynamics to sort of global cooperation, if we shift from financial incentives only to these multiple forms of capital, then you start seeing an emergent future where we are in much more holistic, higher order balance with just about everything. So what I'm looking for is a Horizon 3 vision that puts us in right relationship and in balance with all living systems, including artificial intelligence. And that's what I'm working on right now, is how could we actually even redesign the future, not based on our current ideas, but based on how life actually works and being participant in a civilizational future that is in service of life and in alignment with life. So let me talk about that a little bit more, because it's
I was going to say, let's definitely dig into that, because I'm definitely intrigued by how you're inspired by living systems as a model for design principles. What what do they actually bring to the table? And can you give some examples?
Well, is there anything more worthy than contributing to the web of life? Let me share this. So far, human purpose and the purpose of industry has been around maximizing my utility and maximizing my productivity. So I was just thinking about this as I was getting ready for this podcast. And just about everything I touch, right? The internet connection that I have with you is in order to allow me to have conversations worldwide, in order to advance our collective thinking, in order to advance our dialogues around AI. I got ready, I washed my hair, I used a hair dryer. The hair dryer was developed in order to help me dry my hair faster. I'm driving, the car is allowing me to get place to place faster. If you look at what AI is doing, AI is allowing companies and people to produce faster. Everything is a utilitarian outcome. I think we need to think about a different idea of what the value of a human being is and shift from a world where we are making things for productivity to a world where we're making things for human meaning. So let's shift to meaning. How do we enhance my meaning as a human being in a world where the things that I inherently valued about being a human are being completely eclipsed by AI and robotics, right? So everything that I valued about being an intelligent, productive contributor to our economic system and our civilizations now can be done and will soon be able to be done much faster, much cheaper, much better by intelligent systems. So now what is my meaning? Can we reorient to what my purpose is, my highest purpose? And once again, the purpose exists in our relational ecology, in those 8 forms of capital. It exists in my depth of wisdom and ethical stewardship of this future, in right relationship with all of systems that we just discussed. Okay. So if we reorient to meaning, if we reorient to this idea, then what is more meaningful than participating in service of advancing a flourishing life? And that's where I bring in living systems. There's a whole science around how does life actually work? What are the principles? What are the first principles of life? How do we ensure that living is sustained? Not just my own living, my own flourishing as a human being, but the flourishing of all living systems, all more than human beings, all natural beings. How do we sustain life? If we could create a future where life becomes the design objective, then I think we have a really interesting Horizon 3 vision. Then I think we, catapult away from reductive, extractive, neoclassical economic ideas and instead reorient us to holistic systems-wide thinking around what will it take to sustain flourishing of life. And it shifts us from seeing nature as an extractive paradigm to seeing nature as a co-creator. And it shifts us even, I'm talking more and more about this with a number of different clients and entities. Right now, if we look at what's happening with AI, it's based on this idea of intelligence that's profoundly human, a human intelligence, which is
We
intellectual
trained it.
way. It's very much left brain human intelligence. But we know that there is far more vibrant ideas of intelligences. And what if we could realign the data set that is feeding AI, not just on human content on that left side of the brain intelligence, but on life's intelligence? So
Wisdom.
imagine where the corpus of data that AI operates on is the molecular exchange between, the subsystems in our Earth. If there's an understanding of the, we just discovered, for example, dark oxygen last week. If there's an understanding
Right.
of how life produces life, and we understand that from machine learning, but also from a whole number of data insights. If we can understand how life works, then we can design a future civilization where we are in coherence with life. And that becomes exciting because then my relationship with you is no longer about what can I get from you, but the way that I look at you, the way that I interact with you is how can I support your aliveness? And that becomes an inner aliveness and an outer aliveness. How can I, and around all of those dynamics of aliveness, those other capitals that we're talking about, your aliveness in your creativity and your cultural capital, your aliveness in your relational capital, your aliveness in your intellectual capital. Oh, the other capital I forgot to mention is experiential capital, right? Those experiences that grow us as human beings. If I'm here to support your aliveness, if we have a new economy that's about moving from productivity to meaning, and the meaning is your aliveness, then that becomes, for me, a future worth building.
As if we're collectively bringing out the full potential of each of us.
And nature and more than
Yeah,
human beings. I mean, again, I don't want it to be a conversation only about human potential because that's
right.
still
Yeah.
narrow thinking. That's still in the paradigm of anthropocentrism. But if we can shift to right relationship with life and right relationship with AI, then we have a much richer understanding and possibility of what our future might actually look like.
I'd love for you to just describe what right relationship means to you. I believe
It's
that
the
is probably founded in Buddhist thinking.
it
But yeah,
is.
explain to the audience.
First of all, let me just back up and say part of my real interest and fascination in Buddhism isn't from a religious fervor point of view, but from a recognition, at least my own recognition, that it's a psychological foundation to well-being and being a good steward of my own life and each other's lives. So they're not precepts, they're not things that you have to blindly follow. They're actually, you know, they're psychological tools. And among these is a point of view of what they're really questions or invitations. What would right livelihood look like? What would a right relationship look like? What is even, the power of language? What words can I share with you that are wholesome and avoid creating suffering? So there's this real attention to moving from unconscious being to conscious being, which is part of the reason why I talk about moving. I work with visionary leaders to become conscious custodians of our human futures. How do we move from being unconscious, agreeable agents of our current system that sadly are stuck in these paradigms that we just talked about, and then instead move into a conscious relationship with the whole and shift us from agreeable agents to generative agents of a potential future? So to be in right relationship is to recognize that fundamentally it's to recognize our deep interconnection with all of human and more than human life. It means recognizing that there is no me without you. There is no English without all of history, moving all the way back to the first cell organism that developed, and then the early Homo sapiens that developed language, and then on and on. There is no English that I can speak to you that doesn't include all of that history, and there's no words that I can share with you today that aren't going to shape all of history moving in the future. That we have to be fully aware of that deep interconnection with all of life around us and all of history in the back and the front of us. So that brings a sort of level of intentionality and consciousness that is profound, that is deep. And we need more of that. We need to develop the skill. And I love that actually the word mindfulness in French is pleine conscience, which means full conscience. And I prefer that over mindfulness. I mean, it's the same idea, but being fully conscious of how our actions are influencing our current realities, but all the potential future realities, and recognizing our deep interconnection. So all of a sudden, things like system thinking come in, things like, interbeing comes in, things like being in right relationship with ecology comes in, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, that
What we-
beautiful. You use the term a lot, and I wanted to make sure everyone fully understood the depth of what you meant by that. The inverse of that, which we see a lot, is dualism. And I often get asked if I'm an optimist or a pessimist about where AI is headed. And, my answer is it depends on what we do in the next 2 years. But it's that question in of itself is, kind of reflects our political system and everything else. If there's these camps of either you're a doomer or you're an accelerationist. And I know you've done some very, very deep thinking and research on this kind of dualistic view. Can you share more about that, its shortcomings, and what is a better approach?
So my colleague Yasmin Eichmann-Datta and I really wanted to unpack this dynamic that we're seeing more and more of, which is the dualistic tendency of either being an AI optimist or an AI pessimist, an AI accelerator or decelerator, effective altruism versus effective, and so on. So the problem is, if you're looking at the world through those two polarities, you're thinking on simply one plane of existence. It's the plane of those two paradigms on that one scale. And so, in our view, we're having the wrong conversation altogether. Because as long as you're stuck in those two planes, even if you meet in the middle somehow, we are limiting the bandwidth of possibility, right? Even if we're, collaborating or finding some type of compromise in the middle of what we should accelerate versus what we should decelerate, how we need to think of this ethically versus where we can take risks for the long term. It's still stuck in these very narrow limiting paradigms. And what we want to do is ask the question, what would it take to break free of those polarities? What would it take for us to be dimensionally explosive and really think more generatively about what the future could look like? And so we're writing a paper. It hasn't been published yet, but it will be soon. And the paper is on a concept called generative connections, our true superpower, which is intended to transcend dualism in AI. And really, what it is a call for what responsible AI leadership needs to look like right now. The conversations around responsible AI leadership are far too narrow. They're about, what are the ethics around AI? And if you look, and I can have a conversation with you about this for hours, but if you look at
Very.
our ethical conversations around AI right now are extremely narrow. Once again, they're about, can we make sure that the AI works? It's transparency, privacy, security. Like, can we make sure that it works? Very little conversations around, can we make sure that it doesn't actually harm human and living systems? Very little, and here we're talking about like human rights conversations and so on. Again, super narrow. What we need is an expansive possibility for the future. And what we mean by responsible AI leadership is a viewpoint that understands how these systems are going to interact with nth order effect on society, on ecology, on future civilizations. So, what we're calling for is AI leadership that, first of all, challenges the power paradigm. Because as long as we are stuck in this paradigm of power, we are making choices to enhance our power. And again, puts us in right relationship with interconnection. So that's one of the first principles. So you can see there's themes coming through because that's the foundation of wisdom. The second is around courage. I talk a lot about moral courage and moral imagination. Moral courage right now needs to be about deep listening. And it also needs to be, I'll tell you the story. There's a nun, I forget her name, Meg Price, actually, I think it's her name. And back in the 1970s, she used to go and protest nuclear warheads. And she kept getting imprisoned. And at her trial, she was asked, "You are a nun. Why would you engage in civil disobedience?" And her answer was, "I'm not engaging in civil disobedience. I'm engaging in divine obedience." And what we need is more people who have the moral courage to stand up to the systems that keep us locked into these narrow ideas of what progress looks like. and the moral courage to say, actually, genuine progress looks more like living system progress, looks more like ensuring that life can flourish on all these dimensions. So we need more of that. So how do we do that? We need deep listening skills. We need to build trust with each other again. We need to come together generatively in order to produce that potential future. So that's another responsible AI leadership skill. Others are around reorienting towards the wisdom of nature. We constantly think that somehow we know better, and we don't. And we need to really understand, again, what are the imprints of life? What are the foundational first principles of life? And how can we ensure that we support those? Because anything that doesn't support life, guess what? It's diminishing of life, and it's going to be self-terminating. So we have to pay more attention to that. And we're seeing answers to us not doing that all over the world, right? Like, we're crossing planetary boundaries, we're looking at ecosystem collapses. There's just no denying it anymore. We have to fundamentally reorder our thinking and all of our actions around supporting life.
One of the things that you just reminded me of with the wisdom of nature is the work that Asa Raskin is doing with Earth species to understand, to literally try to use AI to understand animal language. And it's not so that we could become, Dr. Doolittle, but rather that species, other species have been on the planet so much longer than we have, and carry just so much more wisdom. So what you just said triggered that for me.
100%. One of my favorite books is called Braiding Sweetgrass, and it's by Robin Wall Kilmer. I think I said her name correctly. She's a biologist, but also an Indigenous woman. And one of my favorite quotes is something to the effect of, in Indigenous knowing, we call humans the younger brothers of creation, because we understand that there's living beings that have been on this earth so much for 3 million years longer than we have so much more to teach us about how life works. And I think, talking about right relationship, I think that speaks to it very well. We've become quite horrifically cocky as human beings, and
The ego.
Our ego is overtaken, and we need to give more credence and we need to have more humility, fundamental humility, about how to steward this moment. I mean, even the fact that we don't see each other as part of nature is fundamentally problematic. Even the fact that we somehow drive ourselves to be so hyper productive is fundamentally problematic. We're the only species, and it's leading to all of our mental health issues, all of our civilizational detriments. It's this very immature understanding of who we are at our core, and that needs to be addressed. It's if you were to ask me what's the priority right now as our global human civilization, I would say our priority is to grow wisdom at scale. But how do you do that? Fundamentally, the answer that I'm getting to is to realign with life, because even just doing that first pivot will put us in a path of wisdom creation, where we can steward the power that we are creating with more wisdom, because we would be stewarding that power in service of life as opposed to in service of our own power. That sounds small and trite, but that's a fundamental shift.
This is all beautiful, and I can imagine, many listeners are nodding their heads and just feeling, almost rejuvenated by this conversation. And yet a lot of them are, beholden to the current systems that we're in and the current pressures and the incentives, as you said. You've been working with leaders for decades to help them drive transformation. And, in the early days, it was, probably related to helping them remain competitive and keep up with the pace of change. But, now the pace of change has picked up beyond what our brains can even process, as we've said, and that the rules of the traditional competitive game are changing, and, as you're pointing out, just fundamentally need to change. So when you're discussing with these leaders, surrounded in their environments that they're in, of becoming conscious custodians or preparing for frameworks or paradigms that don't even yet exist. How do they react? How do you help them take tangible steps? And are there any sort of wins or tangible outcomes that you've seen that make you optimistic?
I will say, first of all, the quick answer is, how do they react? They're thirsty and hungry for this level of conversation because they see it. They see the systems. They feel trapped in an economic system that forces them to produce short-term profits. They feel left behind. They feel afraid. They want to be generative agents. One of the things that I think I do a pretty good job of, is helping people understand that if you extrapolate our current system and overlay it with AI and robotics, we're looking at ecological collapse and
Right.
economical collapse. And therefore, there is no future if you stay on the current trajectories. There just isn't. So I can make that case very strongly. And as soon as I make that case, I say, and we're not even talking about far out into the future. Just look at Amazon a couple of weeks ago laid off 100,000 workers in lieu of 750,000 robots. If everybody starts doing that at scale, and they're starting to, we're going to have people who don't have an income. And if you don't have an income, you can't participate in economic systems. And if you can't participate in the economic system, no one's buying your products and services, and you become defunct. We're already seeing a concentration of power in the AI superpowers. And as soon as you as a leader of your company start using outside AI systems to do the work that your company used to do, then the question even becomes, who owns your company? So we're looking at multidimensional threats. And therefore, and one of the things that I talk about in my TED Talk is, we know how to lead for profits. We were taught. I went to one of the best MBA schools in the country, right? We know how to lead for profits. And then we learn how to lead for purpose, right? In terms of, enhancing human contributions to our future. And then we learn how to lead for innovation in terms of disrupting the market and being forward thinking and so on. No one has taught us how to lead for humanity. And those are the skills that we need to learn right now. And those are the skills that I'm trying to teach. So trying to understand the paradigms that are keeping us locked in, trying to understand how we're looking at a self-terminating system, and trying to enhance our agency as leaders in order to create a different future. So my answer to you is, people are hungry. People are eager to understand how to be active participants in the creation of a new future. And I will say this, when I talk about moral imagination and moral courage, I talk about moral imagination really having three different criterias that is unlike any other imagination. The first is it's based on interconnection. We talked at length about this already. The second is that it is in Horizon 3 visioning, not in Horizon 1 or 2. And the third is that it's born out of beautiful questions. Beautiful questions like, how do we preserve wonder and awe in an age of AI? How do we enhance our relational value in a world of synthetic relationships? Any of those questions would unlock a completely different vision for the future. So we need to listen into and ask those more beautiful questions. And moral imagination has also three qualities to it. Moral courage, not moral imagination. Moral courage has three qualities to it. And the first one is, find your islands of coherence. Find people who are aligned in your worldview, because we need to bind together. It's in the coherence that we're able to elevate the system. I'm sure you've heard the quote before. I think it's a beautiful quote. I think the language is perfectly appropriate, but the quote really highlights the fact that if we can find our islands of coherence, then the whole system can operate to higher order. It is a lonely place to be. It becomes tiresome. It becomes depressing and overwhelming to be the only change thinker in your organization or in your team or whatever. So you need to find people that you can bind with, and then those people can help support you and shape you and sustain you. So find your islands of coherence. The second is, understand the science of social change and system change. So if you look at the science, and I've done quite a bit of research on this now, it becomes sort of like a higher order priority, is to understand how we create tipping points for system change. So if you know the science, you will know that you don't need the whole system to change. You need just about 20, the science is a little bit vague on this, but somewhere between 15 and 25% of that system to start adhering to your worldview, and then the whole system tips. So that for me gives me a whole lot of optimism, because the more people you can gather and the more people you can start thinking this way around, the more likely the whole system will tip. So that's exciting. And I think people need to get really wise about how we engage with that 25%. And then the third part of it is understanding a keystone ask. What is a keystone ask that can change the whole system? So we've had lots of system changes in the past, civilizational changes. So in the civil rights movement, a keystone ask was Rosa Parks asking for a seat on the bus. In apartheid, it was a keystone ask was Nelson Mandela's release. And you can name a lot of them, right? What would be a keystone ask in your company, in your industry, in our society, in our community, in our family dynamics that would shift the entire system? And I think that's a question, if we really sat with it on scale, it could really transform the whole system.
First of all, thank you for being part of my island of coherence. And yeah, let's get to that 25%. I'd say most people's mindset is in, around work and the future of work, and it's valid. We're in the messy middle right now. I don't even know if it's technically, it's not even technically a horizon 2, but we're in that messy middle. What are some of the very sort of incremental steps that you help your clients envision and take? And kind of a spoiler alert, I know you have a very disruptive take on a key part of it, and that is, as you talked a bit about, separating humanity's purpose from producing. What are some of those very tangible steps?
The first is when we're thinking about future work, once again, we're just stuck in this paradigm of like, what's the next thing? Here's what I say. We have ethics around AI, but we don't have ethics around the future work of how we transition people into a more meaningful state of contribution. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is around, what are your ethics on the future work? What can people trust you to do? What will you commit to in terms of transitioning people with dignity, respect, and wisdom? So that's the first thing. And the whole conversation there is also around economic survivability, so it cannot be divorced from that. The second is around, truly understanding that we are in exponential times. So our linear idea of like, oh, we'll just redeploy people and this and that it's just a Band-Aid idea. What we need to understand, and again, reorient around, I'm going to call back Ian McGilchrist's work, is we need to move from left brain thinking to right brain thinking. We have prized the left brain so beautifully, and we're developing systems that can do our left brain thinking so well, but we don't have any prize or value or worth around our right brain thinking. And a lot of that is there's no way to truly measure data around it. So we have to kind of be willing to let go of our need for proof. So a lot of the right brain is around our relations. I call it relational ecology, is what is the space between us. It's around our insight. It's around, deep spiritual knowing and thinking. And I know these words don't exist in a business context, but we need to reintroduce them somehow. We need to start allowing human being. I have a talk that I call Ethics is Everybody's Business. But we need to understand that ethics and sort of this higher order investigation of what it requires for us to steward this future becomes the new job of a human being. We can't engineer it into the machine. We can't even arrive to super alignment if we haven't done our work ourselves. So that becomes the new job, pragmatically speaking. We need to create forums where people can really challenge conventional truth, and where we can devise a higher order vision, and where we can explore our own limitations and put things again back in right relationship. So I'm going to come back to that word. So ethics becomes everybody's business. We need future work ethics for the leadership team so that people feel dignified in their transitions. We need conversations around how do we move from this concept of, like people ask me, what's the future of education? There's a whole podcast you can find me on when I talk about the future of education. But, instead of thinking of like, what is my major? How about we start thinking about what is my mission? What is an actual societal, environmental, complex business issue that we want to solve? And how do we solve that? What's the mission? How do I contribute to an aliveness, a world that's alive and that's in balance? That needs to become our higher order thinking.
I have two closing questions that, when I think about the Humanity Code, what makes us unique and what are the elements that we want to ensure we're uniquely holding on to as we face a future with intelligent machines? And what are the elements that we want to keep for ourselves? And what are the pieces that we want to ensure we're entraining the intelligent machines on, so that they're part of that symbiotic relationship as we go forward? So would love to ask you, how would you net out, or what do you think is ultimately that unique code that makes us human?
So I have a white paper on human intelligence that I wrote in 2019, and I probably could update it, but I think the pillars stay true. And there's 4 pillars. The first is insight, the second is inspiration, and the third is imagination, and the fourth is interrelation. Or integration. So on insight, it's the work on ethical decision making. It's the work on mindfulness and being conscious in the full moment to recognize when we are acting out of, our highest, most intelligent being versus when we might be manipulated by our systems or our distorted thinking. So all of that work in terms of maturing our humanness becomes our human code, and that needs to be prized. The second, around inspiration, is really about how we steward this moment, how we become stewards. And in that, we need to prize skills like peacemaking and courageous conversations and moral courage and so on. Like those are really the skills that we need in order to participate in a emergence of a flourishing future and guide others to participate in that emergence. And then the imagination piece is really around, yes, we have machines that can cut and paste every work that we've ever done and create something new out of it, but it's still very linear imaginations, right? It's still only creating out of our own creation, and therefore it's continuous. But human imagination is sensory, it's qualia, it's the stuff that we can't engineer into the machines. Human imagination exists in our relational ecologies. Human imagination exists in wonder and in awe. Human imagination synthesizes a whole host of visionary ideas of what is possible based on our felt sense. And none of that can be really bequeathed to machines because they don't have the felt sense to be able to create that. I also fundamentally believe that human imagination and creativity is foundational to our sense of meaning. And so we ought not to, I hate the word ought, but let's just let's just call it out. We ought not to bequeath that to machines. We need
Right.
to
Yeah, that's
preserve.
what we want to hold on to.
Yeah. And so, even understanding the science of wonder and awe, putting ourselves in a position of awe in order to fuel our imagination becomes critical. I'm watching as I'm talking to an eagle that just flew by my window. So, just talk about awe. The fourth skill set of human intelligence is how do we integrate in a new world where we have basically a new species walking side by side us or operating side by side us. or potentially us becoming it, right? Like, let's not forget that there's a lot of work
Transhumanism.
in transhumanism and and bioengineering and biotechnologies. And there, the work has to be around purpose building, around being in right relationship with the machine. I come back to that question. Maybe my answer is not your answer, but what is the right relationship for you, that is wholesome and that would contribute to higher order functioning for not only yourself, but your family systems, your community systems, your social systems. We live in nested systems, so let's make sure we're thinking through all of those potential nests. And I think as long as I'll be transparent with you. Up until recently, a lot of the work that I've done, I've casted in a way to be palatable to a business audience, because of
Yeah.
course the audience is creating the future from these technological points of views. But more and more, I'm willing to go to the sacred and speak about things that just frankly have never met or been included in a business conversation, because and even the word sacred, what it means to me and what it means to you is different. But what I think we both can agree to is that it's some type of virtue seeking, luminous, indescribable sense that we are infinitely connected, and that there's something beautiful in me and something beautiful shining out of your own lights, your own eyes, shining light out of your own eyes. And I think we need to put more emphasis on that. Somehow we're skimming over it, and it's a little mystical. It's unknown, it's unwordly, it's unverbalizing. Like, you can't verbalize it. But somehow we need to start
Yet it's
rediscovering
everywhere.
that. I think we deeply need to rediscover that. And I'm not sure humans are the only ones that have this understanding and sense. I also want to make sure we're cautious about not giving ourselves human exceptionalism on that front, which is why I come back to principles of life, right? Like, as long as we can understand how life works, then we will operate in a higher order way that is in service of life, that is, diminishes suffering and improves wholesomeness and aliveness. And I think if we can, I keep coming back to that because it becomes a spiritual conversation without being spiritual, because it takes out the mysticism and puts it right back to what is this thing that we call in life. And if we are alive today, then what is that magic, and how can we contribute to that magic, perpetuating? That's the highest gift, this wonderful experience that we're having here together. And how can we contribute to that continuing?
In that spirit of, what people can do, and, you talked about, ethics being everybody's business. Here at the Humanity Code, we believe that everybody has a role to play, if not an obligation, to ensure that this radical transformation that we're confronting right now goes well and leads to a flourishing future with AI. We encourage people to be the prompt. I'd love to hear from you what you think is perhaps the most important way, the most influential, the most impactful way that people can be the prompt at this time.
I think the first place to start is to realize that you have agency, no matter where you stand. No matter if you're inside one of these tech companies, or if you're, I don't know, a librarian in a small community. If you are a young child who's just starting to play with these technologies at school, to an elder who is, seeing this evolution and feeling a little unsettled or uncertain. Everybody has a role to play. So the very first thing is recognize that you have agency. And then the second thing is, what is the question that you want to answer? What is that beautiful question that you want to answer? And how can you be in service of that question? And if the question is, more pragmatic, like, we still need Horizon One thinking, right? Because our current systems are demanding of us to produce at the moment. So if the question is, how do I make sure that these technologies don't cause harm? Let that be your question. But if the question is, maybe more Horizon Two, like, what does the future of work or the future of economy look like when we have systems that can exponentially produce? and displace humans, then let that be your question. Or if the question is more, sacred, how can I move in this moment from my highest wisdom? Let that be your question. Or it could be, I ask anyone who's a creative, everybody's creative, but anyone who can visually create a vision of what's possible, people who are artists or storytellers, whatever. If you're an artist and you're a storyteller, what vision can you put on paper that would ignite the imaginations of everyone else? A more flourishing, beautiful future. Like, what can you participate in that? Let that be your prompt,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be my answer.
That's beautiful. And I think that is a part of my prompt at the moment, igniting that. Caroline, this has been such a beautiful, uplifting, and deeply inspiring conversation. Truly a gift to me, and I know to the listeners. All I can say is may all that you spoke of be so.
Thank you
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for creating the space and holding this beautiful container for us to have these really deep and complex conversations.
Thank you for joining us on the Humanity Code Conversations. Remember, our future with AI is being written now and by us. Let's ensure it's a story that honors and elevates our shared humanity.